Right now, if you sell a rental property in New Zealand within 2 years of buying it, Inland Revenue can tax your profit. But if you hold shares for 2 years and sell them for a gain, in most cases you pay nothing at all on that gain. That single difference sits at the heart of one of the biggest money questions in this country. When it comes to building wealth, do shares or property actually win? Over the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through the real rules, the real numbers, and the honest catches on both sides so you can decide what makes sense for you. That tax gap deserves a proper look first because it runs deeper than most people ever realize. There's a rule called the bright line test, and in plain terms, it's the closest thing this country has to a tax on property profits. Buy a residential investment property, sell it inside a set window of time, and your profit gets added to your income and taxed at your normal rate. Hold it past that window though, and the profit is generally not taxed at all. Here's where it gets interesting because that window has bounced around like almost nothing else in our tax rules. 2 years was the starting point when the test first arrived in October 2015. By March 2018, the government had stretched it to 5 years. And 3 years after that, in March 2021, they pushed it all the way out to 10. Everything reversed from the 1st of July 2024, when the window snapped right back to 2 years again. Buy a rental today, hold it for longer than 2 years, and that profit is usually yours to keep, completely tax-free. Your own family home sits outside all of this anyway, so what we're really talking about is investment property. Shares are where things get surprising, and this is the part that catches people off guard. New Zealand has no general capital gains tax, and a capital gain is simply the profit you make when something you own rises in value and you sell it. Most countries tax that profit. Here, for shares you hold as a normal long-term investment, they usually don't. One catch matters though. If you're buying and selling shares constantly, or you bought them specifically planning to flip them for a quick profit, Inland Revenue can treat that profit as income and tax it. But for the everyday person who buys good investments and holds them for years, the growth in their value generally isn't taxed. Now hold on. Because the share side carries its own catch, and plenty of people never see it coming. It has a clunky name, the Foreign Investment Fund rules, but the idea underneath is straightforward. Own overseas shares that cost you more than $50,000 to buy, and Inland Revenue taxes you each year on a pretend return of 5% of their value, whether or not those shares actually rose, and whether or not you sold a single one. Overseas investing, in other words, stops being tax-free once you cross that line. The comforting part is that New Zealand shares sit outside these rules entirely, and most large Australian company shares get treated the very same way. Owning New Zealand shares comes with a genuinely nice feature too, called imputation credits. Here's what that means in practice. A company pays tax on its profits before it ever hands you your slice of them, and that slice is called a dividend. Imputation credits simply pass on the tax the company already paid, which keeps you from being taxed twice on the very same money. We also have New Zealand investment funds called Portfolio Investment Entities, or PIE funds, where the tax on your gains is capped at 28%, and for a lot of people that sits below their normal tax rate. On tax alone, then, shares held for the long haul carry a real edge. Tax is only one piece of the puzzle though, so let's run the actual numbers on returns. House prices in New Zealand have climbed at a steady clip over the long run. Figures built on Real Estate Institute data point to houses outside Auckland rising around 5.8% a year, with Auckland houses closer to 6.4% a year. There's another way to picture it that lands even harder. Back in 2016, the national middle house price sat near $508,000, and by May 2026, it had reached roughly $775,000, which works out to growth of about 4% a year. Shares tell a different story when you set them side by side. If you include the dividends that companies pay out, then the main New Zealand share market index has returns close to 9% a year over the past decade and close to 10% a year across 20 years. Mary Holm, the veteran finance writer, has pointed out that the total return on New Zealand shares since the end of 1979 has run about twice as big as the rise in house prices over that same stretch. There's a sweeping Deutsche Bank study reaching back 200 years across dozens of countries, and it found shares returned about 4.9% a year after inflation, against 2.6% for government bonds, with gold and cash trailing far behind. Well, here's where I owe you some honesty, because a straight comparison quietly misleads. Hardly anyone buys a house with cash, which means you put down a deposit and borrow the rest, and that borrowing magnifies your returns. Put in a small slice of your own money, watch the whole property rise in value, and your gain measured against what you actually put in can end up far larger. One New Zealand advisory firm ran exactly those numbers using Auckland's roughly 6% historical growth, and what they found was that a property bought with borrowed money can genuinely beat a share portfolio bought with your own cash over 10 years. Property gives you more than a rising price too. As Mary Holm herself puts it, the return from a rental isn't only about capital gains, because a big part of it can be someone else, your tenant, paying down your mortgage through their rent. The result is that you come to own more of the property over time without it ever leaving your own pocket. The other side of the ledger holds real catches, mind you. Since April 2019, there's been a rule called ring fencing, and in plain terms, it works like this. If your rental costs you more each year than it earns in rent, you can no longer use that loss to shrink the tax on your wages or salary because those losses get locked away and can only be set against future rental income. A house also demands a large chunk of money up front. It's expensive to buy and sell, and you can't offload just a slice of it when you need some cash. Shares flip that entirely, letting you start with very little and sell part of your holding whenever the need arises. This is exactly where I want to talk about how easy share investing has become here. New Zealand now has homegrown platforms built for ordinary people rather than the wealthy few. Sharesies, which launched in 2017 and is New Zealand-owned, lets you buy a tiny fraction of a share for as little as a few cents. Kernel, InvestNow and others sit alongside it, many offering low-cost funds that spread your money across a whole batch of companies at once. You genuinely don't need a spare $100,000 sitting around to begin. KiwiSaver deserves a mention too, since most working New Zealanders already sit inside it and it just went through a shake-up. The standard contribution rate climbed from 3% to 3.5% of your pay on the 1st of April 2026, and it's set to reach 4% by 2028. A trade-off came bundled with that though, and it's worth knowing. From July 2025, the government's yearly top-up to your KiwiSaver was halved, down to a maximum of around $260 a year, and to collect even that you need to put in roughly $1,043 of your own over the year. Earn above $180,000 and you no longer receive it at all. KiwiSaver stays enormous regardless, holding around $123 billion as of early 2025. And for most people, it remains the simplest way to own shares without lifting a finger. One more thing belongs on your radar because interest rates shape both of these markets. The Reserve Bank's official cash rate, which drives the mortgage rate you pay, had been falling for a good while, and then it was nudged upward again in mid-2026. Rates move quickly, so treat any specific figure you hear, mine included, as something to check for yourself before you commit to any decision. A political catch looms on the horizon as well. Back in October 2025, the Labour Party proposed a 28% tax on the gains from residential and commercial property, set to begin in July 2027 if they take the election. That proposed tax, and this part matters, would not touch shares, KiwiSaver, your family home or farms. It's only a proposal right now rather than law, but should it ever arrive, it would shrink property's tax advantage even further. So what actually wins here? Let me pull it together, honestly. Shares cost less to get into, they're far easier to sell, and they hold a real tax advantage for anyone investing for the long term, with strong, long-run returns standing behind them. Property keeps its own kind of power because you can borrow to buy it and let a tenant help pay it down, yet it demands a lot of money up front, it's harder to sell, and its tax perks have been quietly eroding for years. For most people, and especially if you're just starting out, the smart answer isn't picking one and resenting the other. It's leaning on KiwiSaver and low-cost share investing to get moving today, then weighing up property later if and when the numbers and the deposit finally line up for you. If this made the choice even a little clearer, hit like, subscribe, and switch on notifications so the next one doesn't pass you by, because we'll keep breaking down the real numbers behind building wealth in New Zealand. I'll see you there.